Today we're in Djibouti talking about Ethiopia and about Africa. I'm Vanessa Adams, and I have started a company called Level 4 International. And Level 4 International is actually a strategic advisory firm focused in food and agricultural supply chains in Africa, but also promoting trade and investment between Africa and the world. So the business actually started from the experience I've had working in Africa for the last 20 years. I've worked now in 30 countries in Africa. And it's been my experience working with international companies that are very interested in diversifying their markets. A lot of companies have made international and public commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals, to having environmental, social, and governance commitments, whether they're investment firms, financial firms, or actually in the supply chain businesses. And many of them are confused. They can't find the information that they want about doing business in Africa, or they're doing business in one country and they would like to understand other countries. How can they change countries? How can they diversify? And a lot of businesses that I've worked with are also looking at improving their country level supply chain efficiency and productivity. So it's really exciting because a lot of African governments and businesses that I've worked with over many years, including in Ethiopia, including Ghana, including Zambia, including Nigeria, including working in Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso. A lot of countries, Mozambique, Tanzania, are looking to bring investors in a way where African businesses and African farmers can grow. So matching businesses with local partners is almost as complicated as identifying a good marriage. And so it requires knowing what people are looking for, matching them up, and helping them also understand each other's opportunities, competitiveness, and their potential synergies. So when I worked in Agra for 6 years, who continues to be a client of mine, I led a lot of work around the food systems transformation agenda for the private sector. And food and agriculture has really changed globally over the last 5 years. A lot of people used to be very focused only on production and say, I'm just going to do farming, or I'm just going to do processing and leave the rest to everybody else. But now there's a lot of international pressure and global changes in regulations that require retailers and processors to be responsible for the supply chains that they source from, not just source from whoever brings the lowest price. So people who are looking just for lowest price are not being responsible for the production and the supply chain. And also a lot more consumers are worried about their health. And the more that you worry about your health, you want to know what you're eating. And food actually is medicine, that's what they say. Today, you know that what you eat actually affects your health tremendously. Even African consumerism is changing. So I actually come from Hawaii. I'm American by origin, but I'm married to a Frenchman, and my family have been all over Africa with me. And today we see a lot of young entrepreneurs, a lot of optimism, a lot of people in Africa growing, investing, doing farming as a side business, or trying to reinvent how they see food and agricultural supply chains with technology solutions, with fintech, with agri-tech, with even digital satellite forecasting. So I'm really an optimist, but I'm also an incredibly good problem solver. I work on some of the biggest challenges that Africa has been confronted by. And one of those challenges that I'm working on right now is called the Action for Shea Parklands with the Global Shea Alliance, for example, which is about the Sahel and the trees which are being cut, which are fruit-bearing trees, that they bear shea nuts, and shea nuts, as you know, is shea butter, is very good for the skin, good cosmetics, but also part of what goes into chocolate as a cocoa butter substitute. And right now, as in Ethiopia, Kenya, all over the world, people are thinking about trees differently. And so some people ask me if I'm a tree hugger or tree lover, because I love trees and I promote tree crops. I've promoted Ethiopian coffee, I've promoted African cashew nuts, and global shea nuts and shea productivity. And many people are even investing in fruit crops like avocados and mangoes. But the Action for Shea Parklands brings into it what is so important to me and to many people on the continent, which is the women who are the producers and collectors in villages. And so if there's a way to elevate the voice of women, I will spend as much energy as I can to support. And there's a lot of people working in coalitions to support women collectors of shea nuts, women entrepreneurs, women in business in food and agriculture. And I've been fortunate to help develop a number of platforms, and this is another global platform and global agenda, which affects the climate, which affects the rural economies in 12 countries in Africa, and also which affects the climate, carbon capture and emissions. And as you know, and many people are aware, with the commitments which have been made in the various COPs, COP 26, 27, 28, going to COP 30, the commitments to change the way the global food and agricultural supply chains and energy production affects climate change. So I think all of us have to commit to this and focus on changing and being transparent. Everything from replanting trees, not just shea trees, but any productive trees which bring rural economies up and create additional markets. But also, even today, when you look at satellite coverage and satellite footage, you can also see the areas where deforestation is growing and where reforestation is happening. And so this, anytime I think any consumer around the world who buys a product should be looking at where is the ingredients from and how were they sourced and was it responsibly produced. So in terms of my small business, Level 4 International, we're just working with about 6 different clients right now, but by the end of the year we hope to have about 10 clients who work with us as strategic advisors, and that's a really exciting and an honor to work with organizations who are looking to grow their partnerships and grow the engagement between the private sector, the public sector, the development partners, and rural communities. And we've been fortunate to work on bringing some of those global investors who are looking to invest in Africa to be able to have the right kind of support of the government's support of development partners and the responsible kind of local investment strategies that they need. So that's very exciting. And then
any examples mentioned?
They're all confidential, unfortunately.
Okay.
And being discreet is also part of the core business. But I can say there will be an example that will be announced in Ethiopia very soon. And I'm working with a few other opportunities for Ethiopia in particular. So since I lived in Ethiopia for 4 years, I continue always to promote Ethiopia as an investment destination.
What were the major challenges that you noticed? Because Africa has a huge potential to feed the world when it comes to agriculture, but still we are not there yet. So what were the major challenges that you mentioned?
Actually, Africa has a huge opportunity with the commitments and the adoption and ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And it's been quite an honor to see the progress and collaborate with Secretary General of African Continental Free Trade Area, Wamkele Mene, and the progress that is coming through the political will, led originally with the vision of President Kagame. Because landlocked countries like Rwanda have the most to win and the most to lose with regional trade and global trade. And we saw this very much during COVID, when the COVID lockdowns came, and all the trade supply chains were disrupted across the whole world, not just African countries. So people had to really stop and think about what's important and what can you do digitally, how can you rely and trust people, and where are areas for growth in local production. And then with the price spikes which came around the world during the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the cost of food in some areas going up, the cost of fertilizer going up, the availability, supply chain disruptions, again, as you know, for wheat, for vegetable oils, some of the core fundamental food commodities. And I had the good fortune of working on the Dakar Feed Summit, where of course a lot of countries have compacts to grow their food security in Africa. So it's a pleasure and an honor to work on some of the biggest global challenges today, and bring partnerships, bring solutions, bring the right kind of investors, but also making sure that things are done in a way where the most rural communities actually benefit. So that income distribution comes from large-scale vision and investment, but being done in a very systematic and organized way, where local supply chains can actually come into and supply into those markets.
Any major, couple of suggestions that help African countries to improve their performance in agriculture, in terms of policy or whatever you might mention from your experience?
You know, it's interesting because I started looking at this from a trade perspective, and trade, global pricing and competitiveness and global trade. And you know, people struggle because agriculture is a relatively long process to invest in, and it needs a lot of lead time and a lot of investment. But global trade can move very quickly, and you can see prices change quickly, right? And just like coffee prices, sesame prices, it goes up and down, it can be very volatile. And so there has to be a way where the trading community creates some stability for producers to be able to grow and supply, but at the same time maintain the competitiveness that we all want. As consumers, we don't want to pay double or triple the prices, right? And that requires availability year-round of different products, which means we're all going to be global traders and local producers at the same time. And it's very hard to live with that contradiction and manage for that contradiction. So there's financial tools which countries can put into place, enabling trading to be efficient, but also financial tools to create mechanisms for guarantees and off-take markets, which are very, very active, which enable farmers to be able to supply as well.
Okay, what do you see the future of Africa in terms of agriculture?
But not just in terms of agriculture. The future of Africa is the creative economy, it's innovation, it's entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be agriculture in the way it was done by the grandfathers. I think a lot of the youth in Africa don't want to see themselves breaking their backs on farms like they saw their grandfathers and grandmothers doing. So we want to see more mechanization, more irrigation, even use of greenhouses, or efficient solar pumps. There are so many new technologies. As you know, people are actually farming on their phones. The smart farming is so efficient now that there are fully digitized hydroponic or farming solutions. So I think agriculture and food systems have been reinvented today, and it's about bringing that technology, that incitement, and that energy into African markets.
How prepared are the regulators or African countries to attract this international investment on this strategic area?
You know, the inclination of many governments is protectionism, but success comes in the opposite, in opening markets and enabling trade. But there has to be some protection where protection is needed for very vulnerable populations. And so you have to have very targeted strategies to support vulnerable populations who need the assistance, who need support, while enabling markets to work and opening borders and enabling trade to be efficient. And so that's a very just, regulators have to be very savvy. So the opportunity today is to leapfrog, move forward, take best practices and adopt them and ratify them quickly. I think almost every regulation which is needed has been written somewhere by somebody. So I have seen the very diligent, very, very rigorous, slow and careful processes of regulatory reform. I've seen them take anywhere from 5 to 10 years to pass regulation changes. Yet, I've also seen in Africa regulatory reform go in within 1 year. And that's when necessity is the driver. And so today, necessity is the driver. Global climate change is here. Food and agricultural systems have to change. Financial tools and financial markets have to be much more efficient because everyone is struggling with currency and financing. In order to be competitive, you have to have efficient energy. You have to have efficient financing. You have to have infrastructure for agriculture. You need functioning trade corridors because everybody requires some level of imports and some level of exports to be functioning. And that's for agricultural production to work, even on staple crops. The world is changing quickly, but there are enough examples of successes. There are examples of farming in deserts. Today, the UAE, Israel, California are farming in deserts, and big, large, effective, efficient, successful farming in deserts. And there's examples of replanting tree populations where the trees can be more productive and serving local communities. And we've seen that with forest crops and tree crops with honey and coffee and other specialty crops. We've seen thriving spices, right? Processing in spices, which are high value, right? And which can grow in many different agroecological zones in Africa. And everybody likes more flavorful foods, right? We've seen African recipes and ingredients also available in global markets. The jollof rice competition you hear about from West Africa, the berberi, the akapanga spices, the recipes. Of course, everybody loves their shiro and their injera. So, and actually food replacement strategies where new ingredients are being used to replace old ingredients, gluten-free diets, lower fat diets, more less trans fats in terms of oils, vegetable oils, which are healthier, and these are all critical. Nobody wants to be eating refined palm oil anymore if they can avoid it. We want to eat healthy sunflower oils or olive oils or healthy, nutritious foods. So there are opportunities across the board to supply consumers with healthy, well-produced, locally produced, and transparent supply chains. And whether that is very simple foods like tomatoes and onions. And every market in Africa needs more tomatoes and onions, which are well-grown and tasty. So I think for me, there are some really world-renowned chefs who came out of Africa and are now in global markets, and they can come back and talk about cooking in Africa with new ingredients and local production. And we did this at the Africa Food Systems Forum in Kigali, which is coming again in September, bringing global chefs to use beans. And we talk about beans as a huge opportunity for Africa. Africa eats more beans, grows more beans. It's good for the soil, it's nutritious, it's high protein. And now we're talking about recipe books just talking about beans and what you can do with beans. So these are things which are old news and new news at the same time, and I continue to be a huge optimist about telling the better story on the continent, but also globally, taking lessons learned and best practices from the ag powerhouses of the world, whether it's Brazil or Vietnam, or Israel, or California.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for taking the time and sharing your expertise on agriculture.
Thank
I
you
really
so much.
appreciate it.